Welcome back, everyone. I'm Carrie Morin.
And I'm Lisa Callahan. And today, I just stumbled over my own name, but I'm going to say it again. I'm Lisa Callahan. And today we are back in our three-part series about necessary losses and how we intend to walk through them at this stage of our lives. Now that really we're all collecting them and supporting each other in these transitions, big and small.
Yeah, today in part 2, we're going to talk about impending loss and how to help us prepare and make that as beautiful and light as it can be. And we have a really special guest today. She's godmother to my son Griffin and auntie to all my boys, and a treasured soul sister who's walked through fire with me, and one of my dearest, oldest friends. Actually, I'm older than her, but but we go way, way back to age 13. And she's wise in all things, but here today, she's with us as the experienced and compassionate hospice nurse who has written 2 books. And we're going to tell you about those in a second. And we're so looking forward to this conversation. Welcome, Beth Cavenaugh.
Thanks, Carrie. Thanks, Lisa. I'm so happy to be here. This is exciting.
We're so excited to have you. Thank you so much. All right, so I'm going to read a little background here. This is amazing. Beth is a certified hospice and palliative care nurse with rich experience in caring for patients at the end of their life. She's written and published 2 books, most recently Self-Compassion for Nurses, which is an indispensable guide for anyone working in healthcare, especially in the last several years. And it got her invited to speak to nursing students at Yale, among other places. Her first book is entitled Some Light at the End, which I think is a beautiful guide for anyone facing terminal illness and anyone who's caregiving or wanting to support their dying loved ones.
Yeah, I echo that. I'm going to add that Beth has made it her mission to demystify death and dying so that more people will walk toward this powerful life event rather than run away from it. She's done that for me. And I think that she'd love for everyone to exit this world knowing their wishes will be respected, they'll be taken care of, and they will be comfortable in that final stage of their beautiful life. And for me personally, I think one of the reasons I really wanted Beth here with us today on the pod, besides being one of our listeners and just a shining example of making this midlife chapter look expansive and adventurous, if we have time to get into that. But I just have to say, you are the person who taught me that death is as, if not more, beautiful than birth. It is just one of those life moments that if you get to be a part of, lean into it. It's beautiful. It will bless you. It will expand you. And it makes the whole transition for those of us who are left behind so beautiful and so much easier to walk through if you're willing to try it. And I just thank you for that, because not only did it gift me that with losing my father and other people that were close to me, I've been able to pass that on to friends, family, and clients as well. So thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks, Carrie. That was beautiful.
Well, I've loved reading about you and your books. Carrie talks about you all the time. And the reviews, I mean, it really demonstrates a sort of a loving, practical, even humorous. I think everything should be humorous, quite frankly. So I love that there's humor in this guide because it's needed. I think we're so scared of death and having lost both my parents within 5 months of each other. I mean, I needed to laugh during that for sure. So can you tell us and our listeners a little bit about what hospice is and how you got into hospice nursing?
I got into hospice nursing back in 2006. My first experience was in 1998 when my mom died, and I was probably 2 years, I'd been a nurse for 2 years. So I was definitely fresh out of nursing school, had never really experienced a death, definitely not a death of anybody that I loved. And my mom asked me to be her caregiver the last 3 months of her life. So I flew down to California and I was able to take care of her, and along with my siblings and my dad. And so, I saw the shitstorm that this can present, and the family dynamics that never give up, right? I mean, that is just part of it. I also had, being a medical professional, I had a lot of wisdom, but I just had never done this before. So I had question after question after question. And it felt, while I was grieving my mother's death while taking care of her, I feel like hospice asks too much of people often who are taking care of their loved ones at home. I mean, it's a big job with a steep learning curve. And so I wrote this book kind of based on being with my mom at the end of her life, but then also having so much experience at the bedside in inpatient hospice and home hospice visits, like going into the home and seeing, often there are two 80-year-olds and one
Yeah.
80-year-old is taking care of the other one. That is a lot of just physical labor, let alone the emotional piece that's involved. So, and everybody has questions. And when you're in the midst of a crisis, you only retain like 5% of what somebody's yapping at you about. So I really just wanted to write a guidebook that was clear and concise, but also, they could pick up at 3 a.m. when they're like, what do I do if when my mom's constipated? Like I never thought about that before. All these questions that nobody really thinks about until it's time to think about it. So I just really wanted to offer a guidebook for caregivers as they're caring for their loved ones at home. And I wrote it to a hospice patient because I really wanted the person who's dying to be reminded that they are the star of the show and this is their final chapter to write. And they really can and should offer, their own opinions about what they want and what's most important at this final stage. And I think, like Kari and I were talking about, we don't think about our death until we're either in the deathbed or, it's too late.
Yeah.
I was saying to you before we hit record that we interviewed a guest last week who's younger than us and approaching 50. And so much of the conversation was about, as she is in this stage of her life, getting closer to, thinking about mortality, all the things that were coming up for her that are so important, make her really think about that. And I was thinking, that's funny. I'm thinking about all those things as important at this stage of my life, but I wasn't thinking of it as end of my life. And
Right.
So it was a really good reminder that these things, we're all headed there. and
Right.
and it's such a great conversation to have. And honestly, when we were planning this whole series in response to one of our listeners saying, how about when we have parents that, like are approaching end of life or aging parents? And so that's kind of where we started with it because, all three of us have lost parents.
Right.
And so that's where we started with it. But it's such a beautiful thing that you wrote it to hospice patients, because I reread it for myself as, wow, what would I want? How do I want to walk through this? And I think that's it's a great reason for people to read it, because it's not just, I love that you wrote it for people to know that they get to express their wishes, that they get to have a say. I was showing Lisa like how many wonderful little reminders there are here. Like, you don't have to see everyone. You don't have to make all of your wishes known, like you can tell just one or two people. Like, there's a lot of really great autonomy you can give back to people, even when they can't use all their faculties. I love that. And one thing it reminded me of, when you're saying that they have rights, or I don't even mean just rights, like wishes, is my mother-in-law always tells the story about he would have been my father-in-law. He passed away before we got married, but Peter, who I was lucky enough to know in high school, when they finally brought in hospice, his first thing he said was, "Oh, what took you so long?"
Oh,
And not to his wife, like not to them,
right.
but just like he looked at that nurse like, oh, like he just felt so relieved.
Yeah.
And
He
I
could
thought,
kind of relax. Yeah.
yeah, what a beautiful role you get to have doing that. So I think my next question is, this concept, I've heard you speak live about this, and this beautiful concept of staying in the room and how to show up for people. And like what is it, because you also work with their families, what is it you try to teach families and loved ones about showing up for the dying?
I think I often just model it, because a lot of times people don't really know how to act at the bedside or what to do. And plenty of people do, and they come with like just beautiful, stunning presence. And I am constantly reminded from my coworkers how to show up in, different ways also. So I'm kind of always surveying the land just to see how people are doing this. So I think it's constantly revising, and it totally depends on the person, because so I guess there's two ways. I mean, I really feel like death is a really divine moment in our life. And by divine, I mean connected, right? Like connected to the mystical, the next, we don't know what's next. Some people really do, some people don't. But I feel like it is a really mystical moment. And so to be part of it is just such a treasure. And I try to get family there as much as I can, and to encourage them to sit at the bedside. I try to make the room comfortable for them. I'll often, if the patient is sleeping or appears to be sleeping, but is kind of in the unconscious state before they die, I will still talk to the patient. And, if touch was comfortable for the patient, I'll do that. Talk about music in the room. Like I had a patient who, he wanted me to listen to Jethro Tull, and it was, there was a cellist playing in the background at our hospice facility, and it was so beautiful. And he had me get his phone and go to his iTunes and pull up Jethro Tull. And it was this really beautiful version of a Jethro Tull song that had orchestra playing in the beginning, like a cellist, and it sounded just like it did out there. And I was so happy he did that, because his family was sitting next to us. And, so they got to experience that and understand that that was a really important song to him. And, maybe have that be part of his playlist while he's there. So I just kind of show up for people, and I do a lot of education about, just what it looks like. And I try to make people comfortable with sitting as the loved one is progressing towards actively dying and dying, because, I show them how to just, wipe their forehead with a towel, moisten their mouth and their lips. Just so they feel like they can still do something. A lot of people just really have this restless energy and they want to do something. And I mean, my personal preference is to not have computers and phones, kind of going at the time of death. Everybody operates differently with that. But so I just kind of invite people in. And I also know that everybody does this differently. And if people don't want to be there, that's okay too. I like to offer other options like FaceTime, calling up the family on the phone, and they can just hold the phone up to their loved one's ear if they're not comfortable being there in the room, maybe just sitting in the facility, but not in the room. So they're kind of still part of it. I think it, but I also believe that people are just exactly where they need to be when somebody dies. I have this, anyway, I could kind of go on and on, but I feel like for me, I just kind of model being in there and being, a lot of people say that I normalize it, and it really helps them believe that, oh, this is just a natural part of our life, and to not be afraid of it. That's the thing. I just really don't want people to be afraid of it, because it's really not that scary.
I love that. Such a great transition to my dad did end up in hospice. I'm going to say literally less than 24 hours. So it wasn't long, but the modeling thing is so interesting to me, because so let me take a step back. When my dad first got sick, I came into town, he's in Ohio, and the very first night that we really realized how sick he was, he asked me to spend the night at his apartment. And I instinctively knew it was because he thought he was going to die, and he didn't want to die alone. And so I did. And he didn't die. he lasted another like 2 years. But when we got to the point where he was in a nursing home, he had dementia. Luckily, he never got to the point where he didn't know who we were. But when we moved him into hospice, I was able to get on a plane and fly home. And I got there in time like at 7 o'clock at night, and he passed in the early morning the next day. But it felt like a real gift. I'm not sure I could have done that in a nursing home. And so it felt like a real gift to actually uphold the unspoken promise I made to him 2 years earlier, you know? Yeah, no, it was amazing. And so a couple things come to mind from that night. One, the modeling piece. So my mom picked me up at the airport and drove me there. She sat there with me. My parents had been divorced for years. And so it was so lovely that she sat there with me for a bit. My sister had already been in. And to your point, like Amy, my sister didn't want to be there at the end. Totally fine,
Yeah.
right? Like I think
Yeah.
that's totally valid.
Yeah.
But then my cousin, who is a doctor, came in. And I had been sitting in the chair the whole time. And my cousin walks in and she just plops on the bed right next to my dad and is talking to him and hugging him. And I was like, what are you allowed to do that? I was freaking out. I was like, what if you break him? Because, you know, at that point, he looks so frail.
Yeah.
And I just, again, she didn't say a word. I didn't say a word, but that was such a gift in that moment, because then when Stacy left, I got and sat on his bed, you know, and sat there and talked to him. And then the nurses were so lovely, because I also had a doula when I had my son, because I didn't know what the hell to expect for pregnancy. So I was like, I need somebody to tell me what's happening. And that's what it felt like at hospice. You know, they'd walk in and I'd say, what's changed? And they just slowly but surely walked me through, like, you know, this is what we're hearing. They could never say for sure, like, yes, he's going to die in 10 minutes. Right. But they would be like, he's getting colder. His breathing's more labored. They asked me if like I wanted these really great, like, starlights on the ceiling, which was amazing. Same thing I had done, you know, I turned music on and stuff like that. But I just remember thinking they came in every hour and turned him and all that stuff. And I just remember thinking so distinctly, like, this takes a special person. Like, I don't think I could do this. And so I'm curious, what do you love about your job? And my natural question is, like, how are you around that grief all the time? Like, that would be, and they were so lovely. They really felt like angels walking on this earth. They were so lovely. And so tell me more about your experience in this job and what you love about it.
Yeah, I mean, I do feel like being kind of around the mystical is a super fun part of this hospice job, because I like the spiritual journey for me is probably the biggest, like, most exciting part of my life. And so I just love being part of this, you know, one of the main events in our life. And it does feel very holy to me. And everybody has their own, and spirituality is such a huge part of hospice, because that comes up for almost everybody at the end of life, is if they don't have a belief in some type of, you know, what's next, that comes up. And so, you know, they're kind of constantly playing with this idea of what is next? What do I believe in? So there's some of that internal struggle. And, you know, we have chaplains and social workers that are part of the team that are always kind of, you know, we just anticipate those questions. So I really love, I love the family piece. I mean, family is 50% of what we do as hospice nurses. You know, we do a lot of education, a lot of just standing by. I mean, this is a dumb analogy, but when the dishwasher guy comes over to fix my dishwasher, I'm just so, like, I am so thankful he's there. I'm so thankful he knows so much about the dishwasher. And, you know, he tries to educate me about it so that I can, you know, fix it next time or whatever. So it's a specific skill set, right? Like being with death. And I like that I can offer that. I mean, it feels, yeah, I just feel lucky to be a nurse. I feel so lucky to be in this job, because people are afraid of it. And I really do feel that when I'm in the room, and if I can be kind of in a relaxed way, like you said, I mean, all the hospice nurses, I mean, this is what we do, right? So it just helps, right? It like lowers the stress level for everybody. I like that we can offer that. And how can I be around all the grief? I mean, I do a lot of work, honestly, like self-care stuff, because sometimes it is really deep and heavy. And, you know, it's impossible to imagine when your own family member is dying. So many people sit in the room and they go, I don't know how you can do this. And I'm like, well, it's not my mom in the bed. I mean, it's so different. It is like it is like night and day when you don't know the person. I mean, I still feel connected to the patients and attached to the families, but it's nothing, it's very different. So I don't know if it's being kind of boundaried around that, but and I also really feel like I can offer as much as I can in my 8-hour shift and show up and, be the best nurse I can. And then there's this other piece where I'm just so insignificant. I'm like this tiny little portion of their experience. And so that helps me to just kind of have some relief around it. And, everybody has their own way to grieve. We do have, like I said, chaplains and social workers. So I think they help me a lot when I feel like the grief is too big for me or I don't have the skill set. I call on them a lot just to help, because I don't feel like it's exactly my skill set. I'm very comfortable in a room with grief, but sometimes I need a little help with that too. So I do a lot of self-care stuff. I mean, just in terms of like exercise and meditation and breath work and things like that, just to keep me grounded. And
Yeah,
That's awesome.
Beth is one of the most grounded humans I've ever met. You're in the right work. I think I may have told both of you this earlier today because it's so timely that I saw this little snippet video interview. I think it was with Rich Roll interviewing Rainn Wilson, who plays Dwight on The Office. And he said, we are human beings. We are not human beings having a spiritual experience. We are spiritual beings having a human experience. And it's just so beautiful you said that, because I wanted to segue into, that piece that you walk through so gently with people, that you're available. You are, I mean, you've done so much beautiful spiritual work that is modeled to everyone who knows and loves you. You've done Reiki and breath work and all that. And so I hear you saying you're a small part of that human experience, but that space you hold, like open to it being spiritual for them, open to it feeling bigger than this human experience, I can only imagine is the piece that dispels the fear. So I'm curious, because I'm listening to that and thinking, I mean, just this week, I had a client who was like, I don't know if I'm going to go see my mom. My siblings say maybe I don't want to see her this way. So what kind of advice do you offer when you hear about that kind of thing? Or because I'm guessing you have those conversations with family members who are like, how do I get so and so here? Or and you said something earlier, like maybe they don't have to come. I guess I have this, and partially because of you, thankfully, I have this opinion, which is just an opinion, that people will feel better if they actually lean in and go and see that this body is no longer housing that spirit, or is getting ready. But I don't know. So what do you say for that?
I agree with you. I mean, I'm definitely partial to people being at the bedside and showing up when they can. A lot of people ask, when should I come? And I just say, as soon as you can. I mean, we don't know. I've had patients who looked like they had weeks to live and they died 6 hours later. Events happen even with hospice patients where we were not anticipating. So I always say, show up as soon as you can, if you can. And I try to lay out, it looks like your dad has a couple of weeks left. So, come when you can. I always urge sooner than later if they want to. And if they can't be here, I just don't want people to feel bad about choosing not to come also. I mean, I feel there have been plenty of deaths that I've been present for where there have been no family members. And hospice has what's it called? No One Dies Alone. So we have an organization that will come and sit with patients, and we really try to be with our patients at the end of life. Some people can't. I do feel, and I have also had many patients who literally, as they are actively dying, meaning they have probably 8 minutes left of their life. And you think they're kind of in this comatose state, like non-responsive state. But I will lean over and I'll say, I just called your wife. She'll be here as soon as she can. And they look at me and they shake their head no. And that has happened probably at least a dozen times. And it's such a great, there are really important stories in this, right? Like some people who are dying do not want family at the bedside. I have seen patients shift as soon as family leaves. They're like, okay, we'll all go out to lunch. We've been here for days and, dad's not dying. We're not sure why. So we're going to give him a break. We're going to go to lunch for 2 hours. We'll be back. I mean, I have seen them shift like a minute after the family leaves and then die 5 minutes later. So I really believe things just kind of happen as they're meant to happen, whether it's the patient willing it, whether it's like, the divine mystical universe and their plan. Or, I really believe, yes, if people can be there, try to be there. But if they can't, that's okay too. Maybe dad did not want you there at the bedside. Like, we just don't know.
I mean, I did tell Kari before you got on that I was up all night and at one point fell asleep, and I know I fell asleep for like 15 minutes and that's when he died.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. And I knew it. I mean, when I woke up,
yeah.
and I had no feel, I wasn't sad about it because I did feel that. I felt like, he was glad I was there. Yeah. And he didn't want me to be awake in the exact moment. And then the best part was when I woke up, I had put on 70s music and Steely Dan in particular, because that was one of his favorites. And I woke up and I looked over and he was gone, and Reeling in the Years was playing. I was like, oh my God, Dad, come on. Really? It was so good.
That's so beautiful.
It was amazing.
And then that's part of your memory, right? Your
forever.
Memory of your father forever.
Yeah. And the other thing that was interesting at our hospice, I don't know if you guys have something like this. They have maybe similar to what you're talking about, the No One Dies Alone. Women had crocheted blankets, and so he had a blanket over him, and it happened to be red and green and white. This was actually in October, but it just happened to be. And so then we got to take that home, and my sister and I split it, and we each have a piece of it. Now her mother-in-law fixed it up, so we each have a piece of it, so we bring it out at Christmas. So Dad's like with us at Christmas.
That's really beautiful. I mean, I always advocate at our hospice facility, we have quilts that we place over their body as they're wheeled out to the funeral home. And then we have a little ceremony where we fold up the quilt and we give it to the family member so that they can have that. And I do always, if people are at home, I like to advocate for a ritual, some kind of ritual where they have a blanket over their body and maybe a flower and maybe some music playing, because this is all, part of the memory that you're going to have, the one who's left behind, to just kind of soften your grief process and soften, your new life without your loved one in it, which is physically, right? They're not there physically. And I just think it just softens that process a little bit.
Absolutely.
I'm getting kind of choked up here in a beautiful way. It really is just so, it's a weird thing to say. I look forward to it, but I don't dread it. And every time I hear you talk about it, it makes me just feel like, wow, like, what a gift that you're bringing people, such beauty. And also, like, we mentioned this about your book, Some Light at the End. One of the things I noticed in the reviews about your book, and I was remembering going through it, is your sense of humor really comes through. And I imagine that's a big piece of what you bring into the bedside as well. Do you feel like that? Like the humor is part of what people who are on hospice want and bring forth, or does it just kind of depend?
Yeah, it definitely depends. So it's not everybody wants it. But I just think, I know. Yeah, I think people, especially people who are like, imagine lying in a bed and say most people are bedbound for at least a couple of weeks, right? That's a lot of hours in the bed where you are just looking at the same freaking four walls, and how that is so boring, right? So I think anything that can lighten the tone, bring in pancakes. I had a patient the other day, she woke up and she has Alzheimer's, and she looks at me and she knew it was the morning, and she goes, coffee time. And then we started going, coffee time, and like dancing. And I work with like a lot of CNAs who dance, and they bring like, just a really sweet lightheartedness to the bedside. I think a lot of nurses do that just to kind of soften the heaviness, that can persist. I mean, I think it's really important to, like you guys did the work you do as coaches. I mean, when to step in and you kind of, survey the scene and see what's gonna fly for people. So sometimes people just want you to be quiet.
The other thing I found with my dad is he didn't seem scared at the end. That was the other thing. I felt like as time went on, my final time talking to him when he was awake was the first time that I said goodbye to him, and he wasn't mad at me. He had been, every time I'd leave, he'd be like furious, like a toddler. And this final time, he was really like walked me to the elevator and said goodbye. And in retrospect, I know he knew. I didn't see that in the moment. At the moment, I was like, "Oh, well, that was a nice exit, and I'll see him at Christmas." And then within 2 weeks, he was gone. And so then I looked back and went, he knew. And so there was a calmness. And so it's funny, he was so scared at the beginning, and we did have those conversations around what do you think happens next? Him asking me and things like that. But I think as time went on, there was a calmness. So I can imagine, again, he was only in there less than 24 hours and he was out the entire time, but he would have been somebody in hospice. He would have wanted humor because he was a funny person. So I love that idea of just sort of reading the room, so to speak.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people are afraid of dying. And that's the other thing I really love about hospice care is that it gives them time and space to really process their death. Because like Kari and I were talking about earlier, a lot of us don't process our death until we're like right there. So I think it gives them, plenty of our hospice patients are terrified, and that's a really normal part of this work. And so giving them time and space and sitting with them as they're kind of, I had one patient in the last couple of weeks, she said she was crying and she said, I didn't want to be afraid. And I started cracking up and I go, like everybody's afraid, like, it's just part of this experience. And then just kind of opening it up and pausing and giving her that space to be afraid. And then it softens it, right? Like then you're less afraid, a little less afraid. So, we also have morphine and Ativan, which helps a lot.
Right. Always helps. Morphine is awesome.
I'm a big fan. Yeah.
Love it. That's amazing. So you've been a nurse 30 plus years. You've written the 2 books, like we've said, you've spoken on stages, you've created video guides. Since this is about the best is not behind us, what's next for you? Like, what do you foresee as you move forward into the next chapter, as Kari says?
Ooh, good question. I feel like I am deliberately in this really potent, uncertain phase, and I'm digging it. I have been very busy raising kids. We're empty nesters as of last year. My marriage went upside down and then turned back right side up this last year. So ton of personal work there. Always, writing the books. It's been busy. So as things have simmered down, which has been about January, things started settling a little bit for me. I have been in this really tender, yummy space of time. And I work 3 days a week and I don't have really, I have other things to do, but I just feel like I'm kind of in this waiting period. And I'm just curious. I feel like most of my life has been head and heart decisions and kind of spirit led. Like I said, the spiritual journey is kind of one of my favorite parts of my life. And so I just I feel like I'm in this waiting phase for my next calling. So maybe it'll be pickleball or something like that. I don't know. It may be nothing really, but I don't know. I do like things that bring me a lot of meaning, but I also don't want to squander my time away. I often think I'm 53. I don't want to be dragging an oxygen tank around when I go traveling next time. So, I also want to really savor this time of being an empty nester and having time and space and, doing a little more traveling and just things that feel light and fun. So
I love that. And I love that you don't know. You're just open to the possibilities. That's perfect.
Yeah. It feels good. Yeah.
Well, I know my kids consider you another mom and they love and admire you. And I see how your kids love and admire you, and some like a huge community of people. And I'm curious, what's the lesson or the example? I think what I know is everybody is amazed by your courage and focus and the ability to birth not just 3 kids, but 2 books, right? So like, what's the example or the lesson you would love for your children and my children to take from your journey?
Mm. I mean, I really do feel like, as I look back on my life, it has been a pretty thoughtful journey of work. I really am so glad that I have always worked, and that has been a big part of my life. Mostly because nursing gives me so much meaning, right? I mean, and so it's always been a mixture of financially led, because of course, we have to pay our mortgage and school bills and all that. But it has really been a heart decision too. Like, what do I feel called to do? How can I use my talents and skills like in the best advantage for everybody, including myself? And so it's been just kind of this ongoing journey of heart and head. I mean, I really feel if you can incorporate your heart into it, whatever that means for you. I mean, I know people who are in the financial world because they love numbers, like they can't imagine doing anything else. And I think, that's so good. That's exactly where you need to be. I just think so many of us, not that we have one life calling or one thing, that we're supposed to be doing on this planet, but I think as long as you can kind of mix in your heart in with your career, that makes it just a little more fun and, meaningful.
I love that.
We can always edit this out if you don't have any questions, but you said you might have questions for Kari and I. So before we move into the wrap up, and this will be unedited on YouTube, so whatever happens, happens. But did you have something you wanted to ask us, or have we told you everything you thought you might ask?
Okay, so I'm curious, you guys hold space for people in really just pretty intense parts of their lives. I mean, as a coach, right? Wouldn't you say you walk with them on some difficult journeys, right?
Yes.
Yes.
So, as a hospice nurse, I'm always trying to glean skills and how to show up for people in a tender way. And I'm curious how you do that. Because I know Kari's been with people through grief journeys of their own. So I just think for the listeners and for me, if you guys have any words of wisdom about that, how to show up for people.
You want to start, Kari?
Sure. I'm guessing she was asking more you, but
Oh,
No, it's for both of you.
But I mean, probably like you, and I don't obviously have the nursing skill where you're really needing to get on their physical map. And you talk about heart and head and I think that we, are really trying to get on somebody's spiritual and emotional map, right? Like where they're coming from, and everyone has sort of different ways they relate to the world. So I think first, just to calibrate and kind of pace with people, we start listening for just clues about their ecology, like what their assumptions are, how they kind of relate to the world with their senses. You might hear someone say a lot of, I think this, or you might hear them say, I feel this, or I see this, it looks like this. So you can kind of start like that. That's kind of what we do, what we're trained to do is really listen for how they relate to the world and not make any assumptions about what they are, how they're relating to the world and what their beliefs are. We ask a lot of questions before we dive in. So it's like, okay, so when you say this, you mean this, right? And so I think that's the best way to build rapport and create like a fertile environment for change work, which is usually why they're with the coach, right? They're wanting to have a different experience than the one they're having. And so I think I'm hoping this answers your question, is really getting on the map and finding out like, what is it they want that's different than what they're currently experiencing, and then finding out all the assumptions and distortions that are getting in their way of having that.
Yeah, that's so lovely. And I do feel like that is, I think about nurses and how we, somebody who comes into our facility, we don't really ask them questions about, we have some questions, but it's not like, what is really important to you right now? How do you relate to the world? I mean, so that's so beautiful, and it's so holistic, and it's so like, that's so right. That's just the right answer. But, healthcare is funny. oftentimes it doesn't include those kinds of things. So thanks, Kara.
I mean, that's one of the things we are coaching in the work that we do with the Health Coach Institute. We are coaching a lot of nurses who are getting out of the industry. You know, it was tough. They were tired of just putting Band-Aids on. So, you know, metaphorically speaking, and then COVID just knocked it out of the park for them. And they want to be part of the solution at the root versus just handing cups of medicine to people, you know. You know, the thing that strikes me, Kari's 100% right. I mean, our first step is to make no assumptions and get on their, what we call their map, meaning just recognizing that everybody's life experience, everybody's opinion is true for them, and setting aside anything we might feel. I can imagine something that might translate in your work is I look at being a coach as being someone who flies at 30,000 feet. And whereas my clients or my students are in the weeds. And so often, you know, I will reflect something back to them and they're like, yeah, I knew that. And I'm like, I know you knew that, but you're so deep in the weeds of it right now that you can't see it. I can see it because I'm not attached to your outcome. So sort of what you were saying around grief, you know, I'm not attached to how successful they are or whatever it might be. So I can see things in a way that they can't see it because they're, you know, blinders on. And I can imagine it might be that way when you're talking to the families, right? They're so deep in grief, they're so deep in the weeds, and you can fly above it with your experience and gently direct them in a certain way. Does that land? Does that
Oh, yeah.
feel right? Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. That's so lovely. No, I think that's beautiful. And I think that's just good information for people to have who are with people who are dying, you know, is that, you know, if you could kind of step back a little bit and not get so, you know, just kind of helps give yourself a little bit of distance if you can, so you can see the whole picture a little more clearly. Hard to do.
And you know, another parallel that's coming to mind listening to this, because I agree with both of you, is, and I see hospice, especially you as a hospice nurse, I see this in you, and there's not enough of this in the medical world. And, you know, with my husband being the same, we talk about how people don't trust their bodies, they don't trust themselves enough, and they put all their trust in, like, all the answers are going to come from outside of me. And as coaches, you know, we always say, if you go to a coach who's giving you advice, run the other way. We really are holding the space that you have the answers. We are asking the questions. We are really making space for you to find all that wisdom and those answers and that direction in yourself, right? We're helping you unpack the stuff that's in the way. And so that's the parallel I see that's so beautiful about the way you share what you do, is you make it be all about that person in the bed and like what's important there, and the answers are there. And I really appreciate that.
So Beth is a listener. Thank you very much.
Oh my God. I love your podcast. It's so good. It's so good. I always walk away with some great lessons and just kind of feeling better about myself. I don't know how you guys do that, but you do. It's
Thank
magical.
you.
Yeah.
That's lovely. Thank you. It feels like magic. So thank you for reflecting that.
Yeah.
So consequently, you know our audience, and it turns out, surprisingly to Kari and I, that even though we pictured this for 40s, 50s and beyond, that we have a lot of women in their 20s and 30s listening and looking at this as a roadmap. And of course, when it comes to grief, you obviously, right? Brendan lost his dad young. You lost your dad, Kari, young. And so this is going to be a really valuable episode for them for sure. The question I have though is, what is something you wish you knew back then that you know now? Maybe around grief, maybe just in general. But if you could go back to your 20s and say something to that Beth, what would it be?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it could be considered regret, but I feel like, so I lost my mom when she was 58, and I lost my dad when he was 78. And my dad was alone for 20 years without my mom. And I don't know, I regret that I didn't spend more one-on-one time with him. I regret that I was probably pretty busy still raising my kids, but I think just looking at your parent relationships, you know, when I think about somebody in their 20s, and that's like the obvious next the first person who will likely die in their life, right?
Right.
As their parents, and trying to establish some kind of a relationship with them that's not parent-child, but a little more adult and possibly fun. And Kari has this beautiful relationship with her mom. They're so sweet together. They are. I love Pat. And so I just think yeah, I guess that would be my thing. I wish I would have spent more time with my dad he was a single guy for 20 years,
Yeah.
We could have done something. He would have been happy to like pay for me to go to, I don't know, Brazil with him probably, like just to have a person to go with him.
Yeah.
And I never really offered that. So yeah. That's
You're busy raising children, though. I mean,
I know, literally. Yeah.
I have to say, I'm so lucky to Beth's parents' last name is Riffle. Beth's last name is Riffle. So lucky to know both Mr. and Mrs. Riffle, because that's what I call them since I've known them since I was 13. The neatest people, so full of life, like really, truly, they would be the best example for our listeners.
Oh.
That's awesome. So we always like to do a favorite song or a theme song. And I asked you earlier if you had one, and you sent me a beautiful one. Can you share that?
Sure. It is Days Like This by, do you know who it's by? I can't remember.
I think it was like Kim Taylor.
Yeah.
Kim Taylor. Yeah. And it's mostly because it has this, I'm taking a little singing lesson with my friend Stephanie. And so we sing songs that are kind of deep because we both have kind of deep voices. And so part of it's because I can kind of sing it. It's in my range, but also because it has this really beautiful line that just says, I just want to live my life honestly. And it repeats that quite a bit in the song. And I really feel like now at 53, not that I've been living a dishonest life, but I really want to carry that through in a really intentional, thoughtful way. Just be really honest about what is important to me. What do I love? What don't I love? Who do I want to be with? Who do I want to spend my time with? Do I want to be alone? I just really be honest with myself about what I want. I mean, part of it's because I can be, because I don't have kids that I'm raising, but I mean, that's another thing I would tell 20-year-olds is really, as you are swamped by kids and schools and auctions, I mean, don't do all of those things. Slow down and really think about what you want to do to nourish and nurture yourself. Because in the end, we are the ones, I mean, people die alone, right? Like you alone are doing the work of dying when people are dying. And so you look back on your life and you think, how did I live? What was important to me? Did I become a whatever, a nurse because my mom wanted to be a nurse? Or did I do it because I really wanted to do it? I mean, we're so lucky to live in these bodies and we get to make these choices. So really, I think take the time to reflect on what is important to you, even though you have like 10 minutes, do it.
Oh my God. I mean, Kari's doing snaps. I'm like, snaps for sure. That's literally the whole reason we're doing the pod. So yes, bravo.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah.
Amazing. Well, thank you, Beth. This has been beyond, I'm sure Kari knew this is what it was going to be like, but this has been beyond my wildest expectations. So thank you so much for being here. Do you have any final thoughts or anything you want to share with the listeners about your work?
They can go to my website, bethcavenaugh.com. I have a lot of information about end-of-life care, and I think it can be really helpful for people who are actually caring for somebody at the end of life. And that's kind of my mission, is just to make it a softer, gentler, lighter ride. So yeah.
Well, I was going to mention that, and I will just make a plug for it. I love all the resources. Beth's a very gifted writer. I'm sure you have found her voice very soothing listening to her, but she has so many cool resources there, meditations, some blog excerpts, can never say that correctly. And you have something there called Shift Happens, which I just loved, because your spirituality and your humor just kind of shines through everywhere. So do check it out, bethcavenaugh.com.
And we will
Thanks,
have
guys.
the link is in the show notes. You guys might never read the show notes, but that would be why to read them, because they're in, the links are always in there. And of course, we'll be posting about it on our social media platforms as well. Well, as we wrap up yet another episode of The Things We Know, I want to thank everyone for listening. Join us next week for part 3, where we have another very special guest who has created an invaluable resource for anyone who wants to be prepared and have a peace of mind at the end. It's going to be an absolutely beautiful companion piece to this. So we cannot wait for you to hear that one as well. As always, thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next week, or you'll hear us next week.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you.
Bye. Bye.